First of all, thank you. Great to see you, Jack. And thank you for those of you who took the long trip through this curriculum, Mahloket Matters, with me. It really is a magnificent learning tool to help all of us navigate the incredibly complex times we're living in. And this particular unit is really probably for me the one that drove me to want to take the training, because it's really about the different ways that people interpret the very same information. Now, on some level, that's been a piece of the reality for every class that we've had, right? But this is particularly poignant because it really could go so many different ways. And what my goal is that after we look at some of the sources for about, I would say 50 minutes, really, I want us to be able to have an honest and open conversation about how this is playing out in real time. And I want to open with a very interesting conversation I just had this morning with my husband. Okay. So, Saudi Arabia, it's a complicated country. They're murderers. They have more money than anybody in the world. They don't spend it well. They waste oil. They're ruining the environment. They're this, they're that, and the other. You could say so many things about this, the royal family and what they could be doing that they're not, and all the poverty they could be alleviating with their money, but they're not, and blah, 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 blah. Like you can say that. And so Scott was saying this morning that he goes, well, it looks like Israel's cutting a deal. They're going to have a peace thing with Saudi Arabia. And I paused and I was like, that's not good. And he goes, well, it's kind of good for Israel in one way, because it will mean X, Y, and Z, even though these people are horrible. Like that was what Scott said to me. So again, like even just in that little exchange, the question was, is it horrible? Is it good? And the answer may be yes to both. Do you know what I'm saying? In some ways, yes. In some ways, no. Where are our priorities, et cetera. So I just wanted to put that out there, that as I was just thinking but we'll talk more about stuff like this. So let me, the title of this class today is Fake News or Uncovering the Truth. Meaning, some and I want to acknowledge, and they acknowledge this in the video, some fake news is actually just a lie. It is true that sometimes people make up stuff, totally make up stuff, just wasn't true. Like the data is this and they say this. That's probably fake news. But sometimes there are layers of what's going on and what can appear to some of us, and this has happened to me, as fake news actually does reveal some things that weren't obvious on the surface. And that's what this unit is trying to teach us. So let me share my screen. Can you all see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. So I'm going to make it a little bit bigger if I can. Oh, it's too big. They bring in some really interesting sources too. Okay. From Joseph and his brothers through Jefferson and Hamilton to today. Okay. Ibai lahu. This is the Talmudic term for a question was asked. He asked of him in the Beit Midrash. When is negative reporting fake news? And when is it simply uncovering the truth? It's a great question and something that's very applicable today. So we're going to study as one big chavruta this morning, and this class will we'll go till 10:45, so we'll have a full hour together because I came on a little bit late. So we're looking at Genesis 37. This is, this is in the Joseph cycle. Before, this is in the parasha where he gets the amazing Technicolor dream coat, just so you know, and we know how his father felt about him. And so it's chapter 37, verses 2-4. Now, one of the things that I always really appreciate is that they provide two different translations. One's the Art Scroll, which is maybe a little less, might err towards the theological rather than the linguistic, I guess is the fair thing to say. Not wrong necessarily, and they're focusing just on this verse. Yosef ben Sheva Esrei Shana Haya ro'eh et echav, and et echav, ro'eh et echav, we'll talk about it, makes no sense, batzon, v'hu na'ar, et b'nei Bilha v'et b'nei Zilpa, Neshe Aviv, v'yaveh Yosef et dibatam ra'ah el avihem. So I'll invite Megan, if you want to read the Art Scroll, the whole thing, and then read the JPS. Let's start with the Art Scroll.
These are the chronicles of Jacob. Joseph, at the age of 17 years, was a shepherd with his brothers by the flock, but he was a youth with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives, and Joseph would bring evil reports about them to their father. Now Israel loved Joseph more than all his sons, since he was a child of his old age, and he made him a fine woolen tunic. His brothers saw that it was he whom their father loved most of all his brothers, so they hated him, and they could not speak to him peacefully.
All right. Thank you, Megan. Peacefully. So that's great. So it said Joseph at the age of 17 years was a shepherd with his brothers by the flock, but he was a youth with the sons of Bilhah and the sons of Zilpah, his father's wives. And Joseph would bring evil reports about them to their father. Now, without reading the JPS, what would we learn about Joseph just from what's in bold? Think about it. What are we seeing about Joseph here?
He's a tattletale, it seems like.
Yes, he's a tattletale. Mm-hmm.
He's also 17, so it's 7 would be tattletale. Once you're 17, it's more Lashon Hara. I don't know. It's not a good trait.
Okay.
Unless they were really doing something horrible. I don't know, but why? Yeah.
Right. One of the things that this, now, if you remember the birth order, remember Leah had 4 sons. Then Rachel had her concubine had 2 sons. Then I believe Leah had 2 more sons, and then her concubine, and then her concubine had sons, and then Rachel finally had Joseph, something like that. But one of the things that this looks like here, if you sort of read the Art Scroll only, when it says he was a shepherd with his brothers by the flock, meaning maybe they're talking about his actual like the I mean, it's really who are his, I mean, I guess maybe it's all of his brothers, but maybe they're thinking of the older brothers. They're thinking of the older children of Leah, who were Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda. You know what I'm saying? And then maybe Naphtali, was then came along later. But the point is, maybe there were the 4 older brothers. That's who he was shepherding with, but he played with, he was a youth with, his generation was the sons of the concubines. Maybe he was born in that window. So he was, how sometimes you can be in the same family, but a different generation. That happens. So that's one of the ways of looking at it. And why, and the question is, and Joseph would bring evil reports about them to their father. Who's the them? Or is it the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah that he's bringing evil reports about? Is it all of them that he's bringing evil reports? He's hanging out with the older ones. He's bringing bad, not so nice things. He's hanging out with the younger one. He's saying not so nice things. It's not clear from the text is something that I just want to point out to you. Do you see that that's a little vague?
Yes.
Okay. So now so Megan, just now read the next translation. Start, just go through the bold.
At 17 years of age, Joseph tended the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of his father's wives, Bilhah and Zilpah. And Joseph brought bad reports of them to their father. So another way to read this is not that he was a shepherd with his brothers. Art Scroll adds the word, but he was a youth with the sons. Here, they're using the word as a helper to the sons. What's the word? It's quite interesting. It says, Ro'eh et achav. First of all, it looks like he was shepherding his brothers. To ro'eh et means the et is what you're doing it to. So he's the shepherd and he's shepherding his brothers, which is totally weird. Batzon, with the flock. And it's the vihu. So is the v here, but he, or is it, and he was? It depends how you want to see Joseph, and it depends how you want to understand him. And both would be valid translations in the Hebrew. And I just want to say, this is a perfect example of the nuance of Hebrew and how important a translation can actually be. Does that make sense?
Yes.
And so before we go on, just any thoughts between these two translations? We have a lot to cover, so we won't linger, but I'm very interested to know if something jumps out at you.
Well, the them in the Genesis, I mean, I'm not in the Genesis, in the JPS, sounds like is to, he was born from Leah, right?
He's born from Rachel. Joseph is Rachel.
Born from Rachel, right. So the them referring to Bilhah and Zilpah, I think he says some really pejorative things about them.
Well, I mean, you don't know that from the Torah text. You have the Torah doesn't tell you.
No, it just says them.
Yes, it's them. And the way JPS translates it, I mean, Rosalie, the way JPS translates it, it looks like he's tending the flocks with his brothers as a helper to the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. So what it really sounds like is that the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah, which are Naphtali, Zevulun, Gad, and Asher, you know what I'm saying? That or not Zevulun, maybe Naphtali, Dan, Gad, and Asher. It sounds like those 4 are the ones that have been relegated to shepherding. Who knows what the other ones are doing? Maybe like smoking pot in the forest. We don't know what they're doing. But it sounds like these guys are working, and Joseph was sent to work with them. And it's these 4 that are getting a bad rap with their dad and not the others. Although the rest of the story, when everybody hates him and throws him in the pit, doesn't actually support this. You don't get a sense that the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah dislike or like him more than the other brothers. So it's just a really interesting question.
Yeah. It's an interesting, he brings the bad news, and then we go right into, he made him his favorite. He was a favorite. He made him a tunic. There's no bridge.
But there's no in between. Yeah.
There's no bridge.
And what kind of father, beautifully said, and what kind of father is Joseph that, in spite of the fact that his kid's a tattletale, And what, you know, I mean, because and what we're going to talk about here is it proper to tell something about someone, even if it's true and even if it's bad? You know, we talk a lot about Lashon Hara. I may know something. I know a lot of things about a lot of people, right? And over the ages, I've really lost my taste for gossip. Meaning, because what does it matter unless actually people are being hurt in real time? Then you're a mandated reporter, whatever that means. That's not, you know, covering up something like that where innocent victims is a different story. But you know, but I think that your point is right. Like, even if what Joseph was saying about them was true, is it right that he was sharing, you know, that with his dad? Maybe it didn't matter. I mean, that could be a character flaw. So look at this. Is so interesting.
If I could just jump in for 1 second, I just
Please.
wanted to point out that it's probably a tangent for where we're heading with this discussion, but it's interesting that Bilhah and Zilpah have been elevated to the status of wives here. They're not
Yes.
really in the secondary category the way the rest of the text might indicate.
Absolutely. That's actually and by the way, for those of us who love Bilhah and Zilpah and actually wanted to add them to the Imahot, we love this passage, not because of what it says about Joseph, but because the Torah actually refers to them as the wives. And I'm not kidding you, Jack, when I say that there was a small discussion that didn't go very far in the Committee on Jewish Law and Standards when they were considering adding the Imahot to the liturgy is, should we add Bilhah and Zilpah? And you know, it didn't get a huge following, but some people really felt strongly, of course they should. I just wanted to point that out to you, and I love that you noticed that. So Jack, let's learn a little bit about Rashi. And again, you know, you can either look at Joseph as a smarmy, spoiled little kid or the most talented, handsome guy on the planet. He could be, and he could be both, right? So Jack, let's see what Rashi had to say about this. First of all, it says Vahu Na'ar. He was a young lad. He's going to talk about that, and then he's going to talk about bad language. He spoke bad things about them. They're going to talk about. So go ahead.
And he was a lad. He behaved childishly, fixing his hair and touching up his eyes so that he would appear handsome. Evil tales about them. Any evil he saw in his brothers, the sons of Leah, he would tell his father. Number 1, that they ate limbs from living animals. Number 2, that they demeaned the sons of the handmaids by calling them slaves. And number 3, that they were suspected of illicit sexual relationships. For these 3 tales, he was punished. For the report that his brothers ate limbs from living animals, they slaughtered a kid when they sold him and did not eat it alive. For the report that he told about them that they called their brothers slaves, Joseph was sold as a slave. And concerning the illicit sexual relationships that he told about them, his master's wife lifted her eyes, etc. Tales about them. Every expression of diba, denotes, this is Old French, parler, in Old French, gossip, slander. Whatever evil he could tell about them, he told.
Okay, first of all, thank you. And let's be clear that Rashi is basing this all on Midrash. There's nothing about that in the actual Torah text, right? That any of this happened. So and this is a wonderful example of how Midrash works, because the Midrash looked at the text, saw the things that happened in association with Joseph's attempted murder and then sale to slavery, and then what happened to him that got him into jail in Egypt, and used that to then reflect back on the lies that he was telling. What was the what were the debote that he was saying about his brothers? What were the slanderous things? And the Midrash makes these up based upon the clues they say that the Torah is giving us. But you do understand that none of this is actually factual in the Torah. And the way that Rashi understands this, which is so interesting, and again, step in at any time. I just want to sort of barrel through this so that we can really have a full conversation, is that first of all, I love, it sounds like he's like a metrosexual, like he's fixing his hair and touching up his eyes. I mean, in today's term, you would say that that Joseph might be non-binary, the way that he's being described here, and that he was really very concerned about his appearance and his own beauty, right? That and sort of which we might associate with feminine qualities. I'm not saying that men don't do that and not all women do, but that's just an interesting idea. Touching up his eyes, what was that? Like putting on mascara?
Eyeliner. No, I think they wore the dye across their eyes, like liner.
Yes, right. Okay, so yes, exactly. Okay, so he's putting on his eyeliner just to bring out the blue a little more. So the other thing that I love about this is that the way Rashi describes it, this is actually more aligning with the Art Scroll translation rather than the JPS translation, because he's basically saying that the sons of Leah, who were the older brothers, were saying bad things about the concubine's children, and what he was telling his dad was what the older brothers were saying about the concubines, not what he was saying about them, but he's saying, you're not going to believe what Reuven, Shimon, Levi, and Yehuda are saying about Dan, Naphtali, Gad, and Asher. You know what I'm saying? Like it's a. Do you see what that's kind of how Rashi's reading this, and he doesn't think very, very well of Joseph here.
Mm-hmm.
Any thoughts before we go on? Because this is very interesting what happens next. So it's Genesis Rabbah. This whole thing comes from Genesis Rabbah. Now, so remember that going back to the very first Mahloket Matters thing is that to be really a thoughtful thinker, we should all be able to give 49 reasons for this opinion and 49 reasons for the opposite opinion, meaning a great lawyer, a great arguer, a great thinker actually must have the capacity to put themselves in the mind of the person who's their bar plukta, who's their opposite, and be able to understand what it is. That's really how you get to the depth of any matter. So I want to invite Susan, you, if you would, to read what Rashi's grandson has to say about Joseph in contrast to his grandfather.
So Haya Roeh was a shepherd, tended the flocks with his brothers, that is, Leah's sons. Common usage dictates that brothers refers to them, not the concubines' children.
Right. And then Vehu Na'ar et B'nai Bilhah.
Thank you. But he was a youth with the sons of Bilhah. His youthful activities and reveling were commonly with Bilhah and Zilpah's children. As a result, his brothers, that is Leah's children, began to hate him.
Et Echav.
With his brothers. He tended the flocks with his brothers, but when it came to youthful pleasures, he left them and was commonly with the concubines' children, not with them. The word na'ar does not imply immaturity. It simply means he was like as any youth, as it is written. When Israel was a youth, Na'ar, let the young
Yeah.
man, Ha-Na'arim, come forward and sport before us.
So it's just they're giving other examples in Tanakh where the word na'ar is used to really talk about age, not immaturity.
The text now continues to list a number of different factors that led to the brothers' hatred of Joseph. Joseph also brought to his father bad reports of them, that is, of his brothers, Leah's sons. In this way, my interpretation is a variation on that of the Midrash Agadah.
Which is
Joseph
Genesis
said-
Rabbah, which is what Rashi was basing his commentary on.
Joseph said to his father as follows: they scorn the concubine's children. I, however, treat them respectfully and spend time with them. Other exegetes who attempt to explain the plain meaning of scripture miss the true sense of this text.
Right. And the other exegetes is his grandfather. He doesn't say my grandfather. Once in a while he does, but here he just says other exegetes, which is very interesting. So let's stop there for a second. What do you think about that? I mean, first of all, in your own reading, this little verse, look how much we've been mining from that just little verse from 37:2. But what are your thoughts about Rashi versus Rambam? What do you think? Sylvia?
I think Rashi takes a hard line against Joseph and gossip. And I think Rambam is, I mean, I don't know much about his life, except that.
It's not Rambam, it's Rashbam. It's
Rashbam, yes,
yeah.
yeah, I'm sorry. Rambam is my mind, he's got it. You're right. I think Rashbam is more tolerant of young people's behaviors, whereas I think Rashi is maybe not, and especially since that Joseph was actually not as young by then. He was 17, and he might be, if he were living in a later time, he'd be out studying Torah 12 hours a day away from his family. You know, he'd be like being treated like an adult. And here he's acting like a child. And I'm thinking that Rashi doesn't like that too much.
Ways just to understand, they weren't studying Torah during the times of Joseph,
no.
right?
Of course not.
No. I'm just making an analogy of
Oh,
way,
okay,
'cause
okay.
Rashi lived in the 12th century, and
Right.
that's what
They were
did.
studying Torah.
Yeah. And they left their homes to go study with eminent scholars like Rashi.
Ooh.
So I just, yeah, I mean, but we're talking about 2,000 years beforehand. So it's kind of
Right.
anachronistic to even have that conversation. What I
Right.
would say is, for me, I really love to read the Bible holistically. So I'll just share this with you. When I think about the tale of Joseph, what's actually in the text, and the fact that all the brothers throw him in the pit, and there's a conversation between Judah and Reuben, who each in their own way kind of want to save him, but don't really. And you kind of get the sense, that maybe it's the other brothers, that it's Shimon and Levi, and maybe Issachar and Zavulun, who are the other two sons of Leah that are born later. Who knows who dislikes this guy the most? But it actually makes Joseph appear much more. You can empathize more with Joseph if what he's actually telling his father is, hey, Dad, the older ones who hate me, I mean, he's not saying who hate me, but the older ones, you can't believe how bad they're treating the sons of the slave women who are actually kind of your wives. You know what I'm saying? Like Rashbam's understanding makes much more sense to me than Rashi's. And again, that's just how I think. I'm not saying it's right or wrong. It's just really interesting, and why I just appreciated this so much, because then you could almost understand, like, if Jacob really was kind of a compassionate man, he'd be like, what a great son I have. He's a mensch when it comes to the concubines, to my concubines' wives. He cares for them like real brothers, whereas the others look down upon him. He's really my favorite. He's Rachel's son, and there's a little bit of integrity here. You could almost understand how you could paint him in that light. At least I certainly, if I was defending him in court, I could do that.
I think a piece of this, though, is you have to know what comes later in the story. And for a rabbi whose worldview is that punishment fits the crime, when we know that bad things are going to happen to Joseph, there needs to be some motivation for it. It's not like bad things are going to happen to somebody who's totally good. So I think they're not just taking the story as it comes, because they know what follows. And maybe that's a piece of, and I know you're going to want to head to a discussion about modern times, but that's part of our problem. We don't know how the story is going to play out. And so we're dealing with things in the here and now. The commentators have an advantage, if you will, that they can see the outcome.
Yes. That is so smart, Jack, what you just said. I mean, that is so true. And you know, and I'm guilty of that too. I'm saying my opinion is based upon, I know how the story ends, you know, or kind of how the story ends. But most of us don't. However, what we do have on our side a little bit when it comes to more relevant and modern issues is we've seen patterns in history. And sometimes that can teach us a little bit in terms of, you know, I mean, there is really nothing new under the sun, and people have been the same. The reason we can relate to these stories in the Torah is because they're so human, and we're kind of so human too, and not that different. So it's, you know, but I think your point is well taken. Other thoughts about this before we go on and look at some other examples that Pardes brings into the curriculum. Okay. Okay. So it was really interesting. One of the exercises, if we'd really been able to do this in a class format, they were going to ask people to, you know, I'm not on Facebook, but they wanted, this was obviously, this curriculum was crafted in 19 before COVID. They've since updated it, by the way, but I think the material's the same. Write 2 Facebook posts about the biblical story, one for Joseph and one for his brother Shimon, who just happens to be the second son of Leah, Reuven Shimon, right? With each post telling over the story from the different perspective. What would Shimon say based upon the biblical passage that we read, and what would Joseph say? And then they could say, you know, feel free to be creative, draw your own interpretations, etc. Okay. So then this didn't so resonate for me. We'll sort of go over it quickly. Can you think of examples when this question has come up in history? How may the following historical events relate to the disagreement between the commentaries in our story? So first, you know, they referred to something that many of you may remember from 1993, which is Prime Minister John Major versus the New Statesman. And from what I understand, there was, I mean, just to say it, a British newspaper reported on an affair that this guy had. Now, remember, this is before Monica Lewinsky, before Kenneth Starr, you know, whatever. And basically, even though the guy did have an affair, he sued them because it didn't impact his, he basically claimed libel, and he sued two newspapers, and it actually ended in a settlement, meaning it didn't go all the way to court, and he got some money. because in the end, it was decided in that environment that it was irrelevant and it hurt his ability to be a good prime minister, and they shouldn't have done it. I mean, that's kind of what came up in 1993. But when you think about that in light of what happened in 1998, 99, you just go like, gosh, you know, when you think about the Clinton presidency and how tainted it became over this scandal, it was like horrible and so sad, and this poor young girl, and God forbid, and Johnson did stuff that was way worse, and we'll never fully know about it, and he died. Do you know what I'm saying? Like, I mean, we have to sort of think about just, you know, how history plays out. Okay, so but then they talk about this really interesting about Thomas Jefferson and Harry Croswell, and the best part about this is you'll see in a second. But Rosalie, have you read yet?
I have not.
Okay, so Robert Rusticoat, Esquire, alias for Harry Croswell, writes the following in The Wasp. Okay, Holt says, go ahead, read for us.
Okay, he says the burden of the federal song is that Mr. Jefferson paid Callender for writing against the late administration. This is wholly false. The charge is explicitly this: Jefferson paid Callender for calling President Washington a traitor, a robber, and a perjurer, for calling Adams a hoary-headed incendiary, and for most grossly slandering the private characters of men who he well knew were virtuous. These charges, not a Democratic editor has yet dared or ever will dare to meet in an open, manly discussion.
Okay.
There's nothing new under the sun.
Yeah, hello. As I just said. But this is so interesting. So keep going. So People versus Croswell, right? Because
I don't even know who.
Hang on a minute. Hang on, sir. Hang on a moment. Hang on a second.
We're hanging.
Yeah. Okay. So I think there's this long, crazy thing about what was happening. And this is almost, it's like a whole different rabbit hole we could go on, but I'll capture a few things. An indictment was found against the defendant of what you just read on a libel at the general sessions of the peace in Columbia County, which was removed by certiorari into this court in 1803, blah, blah, blah. An indictment was as follows. At a court, okay, it goes on and goes. So there's this big indictment, and the person that actually solves the thing is none other than Alexander Hamilton, which basically, I understand, he had this huge 6-hour soliloquy closing argument, which I think, well, truth, this was his understanding. Truth cannot be dangerous to government, though it may work partial difficulties. It is evident that if you cannot apply this mitigated doctrine for which I speak to the cases of libels here, you must ever remain ignorant of what your rules do. I never can think this out. I can never think this out to be. I never did think the truth was a crime. I'm glad the day has come in which it is to be decided, for my soul has ever abhorred the thought that a free man dared not speak the truth. I have forever rejoiced when this question has been brought forward. His argument was that there was nothing wrong with saying the truth, even if it had nothing to do with the guy, how the guy was, you know, even if you libeled something, but if it was true, in American law, telling the truth, even if it seems irrelevant, is not wrong. In British law, it's different, which is why John Major was able to settle a huge lawsuit for being libeled for something that was true in the British papers. So it's just two different ways of, do we uncover the truth or do we not uncover the truth? And then the other question is, and for what reason? If it's really only for political gain, what good does that do, any of us? So I just want to, before we go on, I just want to sort of ask you your thoughts about that. Meaning, going back to Joseph, even if he's telling his father, you're not going to believe what they said. I mean, listen, if the brothers are responsibly watching the sheep and they're not killing anybody and they're gossiping about the sons of the concubines, who cares? Who cares? I mean, that's one way to look at it. Do you know what I'm saying? Or is it really compromising their ability to do their job, and their father must know? So the reason the Beit Midrash Way brings in these two examples is that in one case, telling the truth isn't always important, relevant, and you can get in trouble for saying something that isn't your business to say. But by American law, that's actually not the case. Any thoughts on this? Sylvia?
Well, the thing with that particular story is that Jefferson did in fact pay Croswell to publish that.
Yes.
And he sued him because Croswell didn't get his last installment of the payment, and so he brought it out. He turned on his friend Thomas Jefferson because he was no longer a friend. The question there was, well, is it just that Tom just wanted to be seen as a good guy and a great forefather and all that stuff, or did it impair his ability to do his job? Apparently not, because we didn't care. Apparently we didn't care.
That is so interesting. And as Rosalie said, I mean, there's so much relevant to that now. I mean, today, and we're, it's over 200 years later in this very young country. Susan, any thoughts? I know aren't you an attorney, Susan? You're an attorney.
Yes.
Just
I've just been mulling over the fact that British law and American law are different, but that's not particularly relevant to this discussion. We get tied up in court over so many things. And I'm not sure where I want to go with that.
But what I do want to say is, one of the things I do think that the fact that British law and American law are different is actually very relevant. They're both intellectual countries. A lot of thought goes into why this or why that, and it's a different way of thinking. It's a different way of prioritizing. It's valuing a different set of ethical. It's making a different set of ethical priorities, and I think that's what we're living in, now. Do you want to keep going on? There's a ton more material. I'd love to share it with you.
I have a very quick question.
Yes, Jack.
Showing my ignorance. Where we're talking about libel, is there any question about the veracity of the material, or is the question only about the relevance and the need to disseminate it or not to disseminate it? I mean, was there a debate at all about whether it was true, or is the debate really just about whether it's allowed to be said?
I think Susan probably has an answer to that, our attorney.
Well, I mean, my brain went to the issue of the Holocaust denier in Great Britain, and there, I'm drawing a blank on.
Her name?
Yeah, I can't remember.
The woman's name, yeah. I can't think of it.
had to
Deborah
prove,
Lipstadt?
Yeah,
yes,
Deborah Lipstadt, yeah.
she had to prove that the Holocaust actually happened, which wouldn't happen in this country.
Right.
So it turns things on its head.
With this different legal precedent, you're absolutely right. That's a very interesting example. Jack, to answer your question, I think that's why Rashi's commentary, by the way, is very important based upon the Midrash. He wasn't, what's kind of like an annoying gossipy thing versus real libel. By him saying that they were having sexual improprieties and they were abusing the other, that he was doing this, and this, that's bad. That's actually speaking against their character. It's not just telling on them that they were lazy or they, you know what I'm saying? It's something much more than that. So I don't know that it's totally obvious, but I think we're saying things that are really defamation of character. So
And it also popped into my head that with the Joseph story, there could be an element of keeping peace in the family that worked its way into what was going on.
yeah.
Well, I just took the liberty of looking at a definition of libel, and it says a false statement. So it's not that it's a true statement that shouldn't be said or doesn't need to
Right.
be said or whatever. It's that it's actually not factual.
Right. And so on some level, I think, right. So in the biblical story, I think we assume that whatever Joseph is telling his father is not a lie. I think that's an important piece to this, because if he's a liar, then there's a lot of other issues going on. The question is, did it need to be said and why was he doing it? And that's something that we always have to ask ourselves when we open our mouths. I mean, really. So going a little bit further in the curriculum. They bring us to another time in history that's actually a very kind of it's a tragic episode. The following was said by the Maggid of Vilna before entering in to mediate between two great rabbis who were in conflict in the Beit Midrash. This is a real story. This is what is the relationship between interpreting biblical conflict stories and mediating actual conflicts, according to the Maggid. So the Maggid of Vilna had to decide between two rabbis that he loved, both of whom he loved and respected. One was his uncle and one was another great rabbi. And he turned to this Joseph story to actually elucidate some of the problem. So Sylvia, do you want to read a little bit? This invitation reminds me.
Sure, thank you. This invitation reminds me of a recurring problem I encounter at the same time every year. My problem is this. As the official Maggid of Vilna, one of my functions is to sermonize every Shabbat on the Torah portion of the week. One of the secrets of being a Maggid is to highlight the conflicting sides in every story. First, I find the good side and in an eloquent way, show how good, kind, and righteous that side is. Then I take the bad side and show how terrible and evil it is. Every possible good is emphasized about the hero of the week and every possible evil attributed to the villain. But then I come to the Torah portion of Vayeshev and Miketz, and I'm in a real bind. I sit down to prepare my sermon, trying to figure out whom to praise and whom to condemn, and find myself forced to choose between Joseph and his brothers. I have to deal kindly with one and harshly with the other. But how can I make this choice? I love both of them so dearly. How can I follow my usual method of heaping praise upon one and shame upon the other? Thus, the prospect of sermonizing during these weeks fills me with a dread that only lifts when we finally come to Shemos, and I can contrast the Jews and Pharaoh, Moshe and Pharaoh. I feel exactly the same way about the mission, the Jews, and that lies before me. I have been called to mediate between two holy people, between holy and holy, between Rav Naftali Zvi and Rav Yosef Ber, between a gracious spirit and a precious soul. I feel lost. I can't use my normal method because I love them both, hold them in equal esteem. The Jewish people desperately need both of them and the different talents and approaches with which God has blessed them. But still, there was no way I could refuse an invitation to a meeting of such crucial importance to the Torah's honor and to peace among students who carry its banner. My heart is lifted to heaven that God should show me the proper path to mediate between these two giants for their benefit and for the good of all Jews, to enhance the glory of the Torah.
Beautiful. So this is just a picture of the two rabbis that stopped talking to each other, and there became a division in this Beit Midrash. Literally, people wouldn't speak with each other; they wouldn't study. It was a crisis in the Vilna Jewish community, which was huge and strong and very big. So why do we choose to interpret opposing sides in conflict as holy and profane? And when do we see them as holy and holy? Meaning, and I think that if you're a divorce lawyer, for example, I think this is a really important thing. Maybe some of you have been divorced, and some of you understand, but certainly there are times when two very good people just made the wrong choice in getting married. And sometimes it's absolutely obvious that one person needs to get out of the hell that the other person is, putting them through. But so sometimes it really is sort of like a holy and holy, and you want to be able to show love and compassion to both, even though you're dealing with pain and separation and loss and, the end of dreams, whatever. And sometimes it's holy versus profane. And he's saying that when it comes to Joseph and his brothers, it's holy and holy. That there were many wonderful things about his brothers, and there were many wonderful things about Joseph. It's not like here's the good and here's the bad, and here's where the twain meet, and this is what we should do. And we're going very fast here, but I'd love to know your thoughts on this idea between, a rift between good and good versus a rift between bad and good. And can you think of some things going on in this country now that are really a difference between good and good? I'm just interested. I'd like to, I want to be able to have those in mind versus, some of the ludicrous things that we're just hearing, which makes it hard to, it's so much easier to get caught up in craziness. Craziness wins the day. Like the squeaky wheel gets the grease, not the nice wheel that's just going. It's just the wheel. So anyway, what are your thoughts before we go on? Somebody has something to say, I'm sure.
Well, it's sort of like it depends on what is, we are against letting anyone else choose what we want to do with our bodies. The other side feels that they are right. It is their business because of what it says in the Bible, what we can do with our bodies, and they feel that they are definitely right. So I don't know. I think that that's one example of, I can't personally say good versus good, but I think from their point of view, they feel that they are good.
First of all, yes. And what I love that you brought that up. I mean, the pregnancy termination issue is so, I mean, it's so painful. The thing is, I would like to imagine, and this is where you've just, open this up for me. I would like to imagine that the people who feel, some of the people who feel very strongly about that it's not up, taking care of the sanctity of life, whatever they think, is because they really believe that it's not that they're going, I don't give a crap about those poor Black ladies. They'll let them suffer for getting, you know what I'm saying? I hope that we know what will happen when people who who shouldn't be having children, and what's going to happen. Those of us who can see forward know that there's no future for those children, and certainly not for those mothers, and not for society, and not for the state. We can think, but you'd like to imagine that those who feel strongly about it are coming at it from a different way. So beautiful thing to bring up. Sylvia?
Well, I was thinking about that issue too, and I was thinking on the other side of that issue, or the same side, but having not so much to do with my way of thinking, which is a woman has a right to do what she wants with her body, but thinking about when these laws go into effect of anti-abortion, of what happens to women who actually are still going to go and get abortions because they can't bring up children, they can't have children. Brings back that side, and perhaps for me, it's not such a bad talking point, because I also believe that most people are pretty good, even though I don't agree with them. But to see that women would die going back to the butchers, the backstreet butchers, many of them, not all of them, but you know what I mean. So there's a whole, I think any issue in this country doesn't have two sides. There's about five. I mean, more things that we need to deal with. And I think in any country, the class that Scott's teaching on Sunday night tells us how complicated different sides are and different perspectives are. And I think even in the issue of abortion, it's complicated.
Yes. And Sylvia, that's the 49 and 49. That's exactly what they're talking about. And it's important for all of us to be able, you might not be able to come up with 49 reasons why the other guy could have a valid point, but even 4 or 5 does change how you approach the conversation and how you educate other people. Because ultimately, what's the point of Mahloket Matters? Why did they even create this curriculum? We know that there's 2 ways of thinking and 2 different brains in so many ways. The idea ultimately is to be able to, I think, be expansive enough in your ability to reason and your ability to empathize, even with people who think very differently from you, so that you can engage in a conversation that could lead us closer. There is no one truth, but closer to the truth. And another name for God is truth. Like when we say the word truth, that's one way of understanding God. We call God Emet, we call God Makom, the place. We can, you know what I'm saying? But we're all trying to get closer to God. By trying to get closer to the truth, we're trying to get closer to God. But you can't get closer to the truth if you're closed-minded and you're myopic and you're a vigilante. That's not going to help. I'd love to other thoughts on this, because I think that's the point. And you know, let's not be, if you know, I happen to be teaching this now with what's going on. You know, if I taught this class 2 months ago, things would have been a little bit different. That's the other thing. But like, here we are with you know, this indictment against the former president. How might this play out, if at all, in this? In the current situation, which for some of us just seems like a no-brainer and whatever.
What does machalot mean? Tell me again.
Mahloket is an argument, is a back and forth, and so back and forth. Mahloket is essential to Jewish learning, and the idea is when you study with a partner in a chavruta, you're supposed to have a machloket. You're actually supposed to find a chavruta who's totally different than you. Because if you have a chavruta who's like basically your carbon copy, you'll both agree, you'll shut the book and go, that was easy. But that's not the idea. And what you grow so much more as a thinker when you can be in machloket, respectful machloket.
Okay.
So I think that there are some factors in our society that push for every issue to be wholly against profane, and that we have a responsibility to try, as you say, to look for the holy in the other side, if you will. I'm quite fascinated, is probably not the right word, but I'm definitely interested in seeing how this indictment plays out. And it's amazing that though I try to hear what is the holy on the other side, I hear a lot of extraneous information, but I don't really hear much that tells me what is the defense, what is the legitimacy of the other point of view. And I think I'm trying to hear it, but I just don't hear it.
I think that's a really good point.
So okay, I think so too. That's why, I mean, it's extreme. And when you and one of the things is when you're talking about extraneous information, that's sometimes because there really is no true relevant other side, and it's what they call distraction or diversion. But let's go back honestly, for all of us, because let's go back into the Trump presidency or something like that. And let's think about some things that happened that could have been holy and holy. I mean, one thing that jumps to mind is, you know, the political, you could say, look at how I was about to say that, the political ploy of moving the embassy to Jerusalem. Like, was that the right thing to do? You know, and on some level, you know, it kind of. I mean, it was mean, it was nasty, it was a slap in the face to the Palestinians, it was a lot of different things. And that's kind of where the capital always belonged. You know what I'm saying? I mean, that's where the embassy always belonged. You could say, you know, some would say, no, it belongs in the biggest city, but others would say, no, it belongs really in, you know, the place where all the three religions consider home. Devout Christians aren't flocking to Tel Aviv, but they do go to Jerusalem. Do you know what I'm saying? That you could say that the American embassy absolutely did belong there. So, I mean, that might be one example during that presidency of a choice that was made that you could defend that way. And I'm sure there are others.
There certainly are others. I think a recognition that China may be not our best buddy. I think that was probably an important move during that presidency.
Oh, yes. And I also think that even though the former president was actually against kind of what happened, that when COVID happened, came front and center with what we're going to do as a nation to heal. And there were a lot of different ways to do that, and it got probably over politicized, but the fact that it got politicized meant that the Surgeon General was out there talking and saying, this is what we found, this is what the research is. And so I think that that part was, and the other part where I don't want to get vaccinated and all that stuff, sparked the kind of debate and the kind of knowledge that citizens of this country needed to deal with COVID. So
Interesting. Very nice, Sylvia. Megan, any thoughts? Anything come to mind? I'm just looking at you. I'm not pointing. You do not have to share anything. I'm just
listening. I have so many people in my family who are on a different side of thought than I am, that I've learned right now, debate is almost impossible. I just stay away from it. It gets too mean. And then I look at some of the people that they listen to and they honor, and I can't, it's very hard for me to see how they twist, very bright people. To me, they twist things around about, I looked at one person that, I'm talking about my ex-husband, one of my kids, one of the person that he listens to faithfully every morning. I thought, what's this guy saying about Trump now? And all he had to say, what I found was that Trump had as much, could get a fair trial in New York as far as a Black person could get in the South decades ago. And I thought, what does that have? I saw I couldn't even answer what he was doing. So, and I can't, to keep the conversation going in my family, I stay back here. So when I hear that there's a avenue for debate, I don't remember, but then I was young and I wasn't as involved or bringing up kids and taking care of myself. And I don't remember a time when things are so divided that one has to just stay away from the table of any conversation. So it's very interesting to listen and try to see if I try to find a middle ground personally with issues going on today. And I find the abortion issue and women's rights, women's body rights, there's too much mixture of church and state. We're not supposed to have that.
Right.
And we have it. And but to argue that is I don't know. It's a very complex time. That's why I love this course.
First of all, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah.
And I'm so glad you took the course. And I hope, again, they were spread out. I hope, some of the topics were were meaningful and interesting. They certainly are things that I think about all the time. And I believe they've created a follow-up curriculum, which I'm going to try to get my hands on. I'd love to be able to do, 4 or 5 of these a year, where we just come together, in under this umbrella and talk about the hard things that keep all of us up at night. What keeps me up at night is dissension in our society, and the twisting of what I call truth for very self-serving purposes, not to save a life, but to hurt, to self-aggrandize and whatever. And I just, it's helpful for me. Jack, it was very special having you part of the class. And I want to encourage you to sign up as a rabbi. I think you certainly can, to be part of one of the trainings of this, so that you can teach this to your community. And not that you couldn't, I'd be happy to share the materials, but it's, I think, something you'd enjoy very much.
Thank you, and kudos to you on what a wonderful job you do in guiding this class.
Well, thank you.
It's really good.
I give all the credit to Pardes for providing the incredible source materials, but it was a great privilege. And first of all, Diane, I'm so glad you're here. This is the end of this unit, but I think there's another unit that I can train to do. So stay tuned, and please, Diane, can you just say a little bit like where you're from and how you found out about it?
Hi, I'm from Tucson, Arizona, and I don't really know how I found out about it. I don't know if you're connected to the Hub or one of those organizations. Was that it?
Yes.
And that was one of the best choices I've ever made. So thank you so much. It's just been terrific. I'm looking forward to more.
Well, first of all, I'm so glad. And I want to tell you that this group and some other people as well study together every Monday morning. And the teachers that teach, we have different scholars, are the best of the best. They're not the most famous in the Jewish world, but they are very thoughtful. And we have these lovely learning discussions. So please consider coming back at 9:30 on, well, I don't know what time zone you're in, either 10:30 or 9:30 on Monday mornings to join this Learning Institute with this wonderful group of people. Okay.
Thank you so much. I will do that.
All right, dear.
This is really, really good.
Everybody, I just want to say as we close, as I said at the beginning, studying together difficult things that brings us closer to compromise and peace is what living a Jewish life really is supposed to all be about. That is a paramount Jewish value. It actually was, even in Torah and certainly in rabbinic times, and that's our job right now. There's not that many of us in the world, but we want to be the healers, not the dissenters or the foment dissent. And so thank you all for being that and for your commitment to learning and having an open mind. And I just wish you a wonderful week. And we'll see you next week when Daniel closes his Zionism class. And you're going to have a wonderful experience with Bex. Rosenblatt is coming back in July. And she's going to do some really interesting midrashim on Lamentations, which are they're mind-blowing. So we're going to do 3 weeks leading up to Tisha B'Av, and then 1 week after Tisha B'Av. And then we have some exciting stuff coming back in the fall. All right. I'll see y'all.
Great. Thank you so much.
Thank
It
you.
was great.
Thank
Really
you.
good.
Soon.
Made my Monday and moving forward.
There we go.